So If Beale Street Could Talk, which is the new film by Barry Jenkins, who came on the show last week and very impressively remembered having been on the show for Moonlight a couple of years ago, which was great. So adapted from the James Baldwin novel, nominated for 3 Academy Awards, adapted screenplay, score by Nicholas Britell, and I would say, supporting actress for Regina King. Story set in 70s Harlem, which plays out against a backdrop of racism and oppression and false imprisonment. And on one hand, you can say it's a story about a young African-American man falsely accused of a hideous crime, jailed like so many of his peers and contemporaries. So it is, on the one hand, a story that is deeply rooted in, social realism and injustice. But actually, and as Barry Jenkins was saying when he was on last week, it's first and foremost, and actually overall, it's a love story. I mean, we begin with Tish and Fonnie, who are these two lovers. We see them overhead. There's this beautiful overhead shot in which the camera is kind of gently turning and gently swirling as they walk down a flight of steps outside and then along a pavement. And Nicholas Britell's score is soaring, and these strings are they're suggesting romance, but also something else, also something kind of almost otherworldly and ethereal. And the couple turn and look at each other, and they're on the brink of something. And then, of course, because the way in which the narrative plays out is that the time periods are shuffled back and forth, we discover that Fonnie is in prison. Tish is pregnant. She's happy with that, as is he, as are her family. But his God-fearing mother is outraged, believing that Tish is not worthy of her son, but also, ironically, believing that Tish is exactly what her son deserves, and what he needs to do is to get back on the straight and narrow.
That child is coming. It's your grandchild. I don't understand you. It's your grandchild. What difference does it make how he gets here? The child ain't got nothing to do with that. Ain't none of us got nothing to do with that. Child. That child. That child. That child. That child. Get your shit. Take your shit with you.
The performance is so great. Just hearing that just takes me straight back into the movie. I think that for me, the genius of Barry Jenkins' work is that what he manages to do is to take something which has a very specific time, place, and setting, and make it universal. And the way he does it is by focusing on specific details. And it's this kind of philosophical thing that the closer you look at something, the wider picture you see, the more you focus in on very specific moments, very specific details, weirdly, the wider the overall picture becomes. I think we saw this in Moonlight, which on the one hand, if you describe Moonlight before Moonlight became the sensation that was Moonlight, if you describe it when it first came out and it was seen as an art house movie, although it got very good responses from the critics from the moment it first played, it was an art house movie it was a coming-of-age story about a young man growing up in poverty amid addiction and drugs. And somehow it became this absolutely classic coming-of-age story that anybody, a 56-year-old white man from Barnet who had no experience of the life that was being described in that film could say, oh, yeah, I understand. I completely invest in that character, and the reason was because the precision of detail in the way in which that story was told universalized it, that you felt that you were seeing the world through the eyes of the characters. And the same is true here. It's so full of things that you recognize as tangible physical experience. There are many scenes in which we see a record being put on. We see the business. And this is a fairly common cinematic trope, is that somebody puts on vinyl, although it's often used by directors as a kind of shorthand to show that somebody's got depth and soul. I mean, there's a Jason Statham film in which Jason Statham puts on vinyl. It's a shorthand for, it's okay, it's the Jason Statham film in which he's read a bunch of books and he plays vinyl. But here, the act of putting on a record takes you right back into that moment, but it also makes it something which seems more universal. The the feeling of flesh touching flesh. I mean, there is a love scene, for want of a better phrase. I always hate that phrase, but that's what which is played with an intimacy which is absolutely brilliant and is, I think, one of the most perfectly judged intimate moments that I've seen in cinema. One of the comparisons I thought of at the time, actually, weirdly enough, was Don't Look Now, which is a very different film, but has that kind of very intimate scene in it. And also, it's a film in which the things that you dwell on are the magic of a look, the way in which when characters look at each other, Jenkins has this repetitive motif that the characters will look towards the camera. And whereas in the past, we've seen him sort of experimenting with, music that's slewed and chopped and screwed and slowed down and he does this a lot as a visual trope as well, which is taking a moment and slowing it, just slightly bending time, causing time to expand. And as a character looks out from the camera, looks out towards us, and everything seems to sort of crystallize in a moment. And it is a film in which there are many moments in which the most dramatic things happen through a character looking towards the camera. It's also a film of small physical gestures. I mean, there was one particular thing that struck me, and I've seen the film a few times now, which is that when Tish is trying to tell her mother that she's pregnant, the camera adopts her point of view, and we see the mother from behind, and she says, "Mama," and there's this just tiny gesture of shoulders and neck and head, and before she even turns around, you know that she knows exactly what's coming. So I think that for me, Barry Jenkins is a very, is it sensuous or sensual? I'm never sure what the difference between those two words is. He's a very tactile filmmaker. He's a filmmaker who uses cinema in a very physical way. It's to do with music, and it's to do with time, and it's to do with slowing down a moment, and it's to do with capturing you in those breathtaking moments. And as a result of that, it's sometimes possible to forget that the reason all that stuff is working is because the period detail, the specifics detail, the specifics of where the characters are, how the characters got there, and why they are in the situation that they are in the wider social picture, is all filled in so well that what you concentrate on is a hand touching a pane of glass. She says at one point, "I hope that nobody ever had to see someone they love through glass." And then that's turned into this visual moment that, of course, reminds you of the moment from Manhunter. And, because this hands on windows is a kind of classic. But when Jenkins does it, it doesn't seem like a cliche. It seems like something he just invented. And I loved it. I thought it was great.